my loves. Hello, hello, hello. My name is Dustina. This is Boujee Astrology, and we're going to take a look at the major astrological transits for the month of March 2025. Now, before I do any type of energetic breakdown of some of the things that I expect to be coming in, I wanted to let everybody know first and foremost, I'm going to be extending the monthly special from February into March. A one-on-one session with me is going to remain $35. A 90-minute session with me is going to remain $50. You can still book those on the website, of course, www.thespirituallyboujee.com. Go to astrological consultations, and again, you can book everything directly through the website. I have a lot of people that are going to be listening to me for the very first time this month. I'm not saying that with ego. I'm saying like I've done a lot of events lately. I'm starting to meet new people lately. I've been doing more and more things with people that I just know that base is growing. And for those that want to take advantage of that special, I want to go ahead and extend that forward. If you didn't get the chance to book in February, then you're going to be able to in March. So again, I'm going to bring that forward. Now, I already know that I'm going to be referencing 2 prior episodes in this monthly forecast. I just want to put that out up front from the beginning. One of those is going to be the node video, the one that I did back in January, whenever the nodes changed signs, when the North Node went into Pisces and the South Node went into Virgo. And I specifically started to reference things during that time of what to anticipate. And when I start to explain them again in this episode, I will again reference that video, and that will be linked in the description. The other episode that I'm going to be talking about, which will also be linked in the description, is my meditative rant video about revolutionary markers. Because we're getting into the intense energy, and no matter how I have meditated on this time frame, everything, no matter how far back I go back in my meditation to where we're at right now, everything tells me that March and April are a response, a result, a retort, a direct contribution, a consequence, whatever you want to call it, to what happened in the Mars retrograde. One of the main reasons I say that is because of how many things are happening in Mars's sign immediately following a Mars retrograde. We have a lot of things that are going to be happening this month. Day one, first, right out the gate, first thing we are get to do, Venus is going to turn retrograde. Later in the month, we're going to have the start of eclipse season. We're going to have our full moon in Virgo. That's going to happen on March 13th, 14th, depending on your individual time zone. Then directly after that, on March 15th, Mercury is going to go retrograde in Aries, in Mars' sign. And again, it speaks to a response. By the end of the month, we will have our third and final Aries eclipse, closing out the cycle of things that have been getting changed over the course of the last 2 years. And that's going to happen on March 29th. And 24 hours later, Neptune is going to move into Aries. And when we start talking about that entry of Neptune into Aries, that's going to be a big part of something that I discussed in that revolutionary markers episode. So there's a lot of things that's going to speak to some prior episodes, but not the weekly stuff so much. More so those bigger meditative rant videos, so that way people understand, like, I was babbling about this for a while. That's why I call them meditative rants. Okay. So first and foremost, Venus is going to go retrograde. And what's interesting about the point of the sky where Venus is going retrograde is it's the 9 to 10 degree mark of Aries. That's going to be a very big marker for us. And if you have placements in that area, anywhere between 5 and 15 degrees of Aries, Cancer, Libra, or Capricorn, you're going to have extra things that are going to be happening that you're going to be feeling over the course of the next month because of how many things are going to happen at such a minute point of the sky. At 10 degrees of Aries is where Venus is going to turn retrograde. at 9 degrees of Aries is where Mercury is going to go retrograde. So right next to each other. And at the end of the month, the final eclipse that we're going to have in Aries is going to be at 9 degrees of Aries. So we have a series of things, a series of energies, a series of events, which also means like a series of reactions, a series of responses, a series of consequences, whether intended or not, still a set of consequences. And a lot of that energy is going to be moving in a contra-ANTISCIA to Saturn in Pisces. And one of the things I've talked about over the course of the last 2 months is there's a lot of hidden transits on top of the very powerful, impactful, direct transits that we see. And the start of the Venus retrograde is in a direct contra-ANTISCIA to Saturn. And over the course of the next month, we will have a series of those. But we also have to look at who rules the two signs that are going to be having all the fun. The two signs having all the fun are Pisces and Aries. The ruler of Aries is Mars. And again, we just ended a Mars retrograde. Put a pin in that. The traditional ruler of Pisces is Jupiter. And while we're going through so much energy between their signs, they too will have a hidden transit, an indirect transit that is not easily seen. And that is called an antiscia. Jupiter represents wealth and prosperity, represents the masses, anything that is in large volume, a large count. There are things that impact people. And over the course of the next 2 months, there's going to be a lot of irritable, volatile, frustrating responses to people in positions of power. While we're going through an antiscia, which would be a hidden opposition between Jupiter and Mars, in their signs, we're having a mess of transits, of both indirect hidden transits as well as direct and very vibrant in front of you transits. That tells me that a lot of the things that as they start to impact people also have a lot of things that are going on behind the scenes. Therefore, there are layers and levels to everything that commences. You will experience that in your individual lives just as much as we are going to experience it in our environment. Aries is a very reactive sign. And based off of how I've been picking up on these transits, a lot of the reactions that are going to come through are going to be based off people that are almost hitting points of fighting for survival. Now, the weekly episode I did going into March 1st, I had to look up a word to be able to describe it. And a lot of you know what I'm talking about. Is I still can't say it appropriately. I'm messing this up all the time. Obnubilation. It is the process of dimming, darkening, veiling, bringing in the shadows. And the reason I had to look up a word to be able to describe this is because whenever I would meditate on it, there is something about seeing darkness hollow in to where light becomes so small. And once something becomes so small, people's reaction to it is going to be one of two ways. They either succumb to darkness, they give in to a situation, they let things happen, they don't pick a fight, or survival mode kicks in. And so much of this next 2 months feels like a reaction of survival mode. I'm not going to let someone rule over me. I am not going to let these things impact me. I am not going to let fear control me. I am not going to let someone who has no emphasis on my daily life tell me how I should live my daily life. I don't like to be political. Most of you guys know that. And I try to stay as middle of the road as possible. But no matter how I look at it, there's a political sector in part of what I will be describing. I don't care what your personal stance is. Whatever you believe is what you believe. What I believe is what I believe. And we find the middle of the road as a way to work between one another. I have plenty of people that are different political backgrounds, different career backgrounds than me. Like they have so much difference in their lives, but that still doesn't take away from how we speak to one another. I believe in being able to be collaborative regardless of background. So what I emphasize next is not pushing any level of a political agenda. I am just saying there is going to be fighting, reactions, survival mode in a lot of ways from people. Now, whether that survival mode is successful or not, can't really see that. And a lot of us, we're not going to know that until we get into April. So much of this month is going to be the series of reactions. And a lot of that gets spoken through Venus's vibration. But not only that, there is the markers of Mercury, his retrograde, and how closely related it is to Venus, while Mercury is hosting the more dominant of the eclipse axis. Now, why do I say it that way? Anytime you have an eclipse in a sign where the node is, it is very much in alignment with that vibration. The second eclipse that we'll have this month is going to be in Aries, but the North Node is in Pisces. That is an out of sign eclipse. And again, it is the final in the series of 3. It is the icing on the cake for energies that are 2 years in the making. For many of us, we've been working towards something, striving towards something, trying to put something into order. We've been feeling very compelled to go in certain directions. And now we're going to be reaching a final marker in something while also still dealing with the levels of transitions of so much activity around us. Now, the South Node is in Virgo. It is in Mercury sign. And one of the things I said in that nodal video before is that there's always a pattern that whatever planet that is hosting a node, doesn't matter which one, so South Node, North Node, either one, when that planet goes retrograde, the emphasis is heavier. Many of you might remember the summer of 2023 when Venus went retrograde in Leo. And it was right after the South Node went in Libra, and I said, this is hyperized purge. Yeah. Now we're going to go into eclipse season where Mercury, the ruler of Virgo, is going to be the stronger of the 2 planets hosting an eclipse. And immediately following said eclipse, Mercury is going to go retrograde. The ruling planet is going retrograde. There's going to be a lot of restructure, reshaping, reorder that's going to speak volumes in what's happening in the Venus retrograde. And again, so much of their energy is spoken to be working together. And I want to give a little visual. Many of you have actually, in our one-on-ones, we've talked about this, but I want to put more emphasis on it now. Mercury and Venus are working together in some way. The day Venus goes retrograde, Mercury is going to enter shadow. As Venus is spinning and stewing and stirring in her little area of Aries that she's at, what's going to happen is Mercury is going to go into Aries. These two are going to hit a conjunction. And right around this conjunction mark, Venus will surpass while Mercury is stunned, shocked, stunted. And he will pretty well slow down, also go to stationing, stewing, and redirecting, turning retrograde, and then we'll follow her. And the two of these two planets, they will go together anywhere between 1 to 4 degrees apart, all the way back into Pisces. And they stay together. Mercury will not leave shadow until the final Venus-Saturn conjunction. Well, the triggered transits that started Venus's shadow, not the exact degree, but the transit trigger, was the first Venus-Saturn conjunction. So there's a lot of reflection that speaks to logical change, Mercury, aesthetic change, Venus, and I'm saying aesthetic very loosely, and Saturn, rules, government, authority, boundaries. Now, one of the things I talked about whenever we did that nodal video was I anticipate large amounts of change towards laws whenever it comes to the Virgo side of the eclipse axis. And I think that every time Mercury goes retrograde, we're going to have massive change in rules, boundaries, laws. But I also think that there's going to be a lot of major changes that impact the workforce. And again, I started saying this back in January. Since I said that in January, we've had thousands upon thousands upon thousands of layoffs, depending on the industry that we want to talk about. It can go from the government to Starbucks and everywhere in between. The South Node is in Virgo. Some of the vibration that is going to bring forward responses throughout the month of March will initially come through at the start of the month when Venus goes retrograde. But much, much more will happen once eclipse season fully kicks in between March 13th, 14th, depending on your time zone again, and Mercury turning retrograde, which again, depending on your time zone, could be anywhere between the 14th and the 15th, because it's happening like right after midnight each time. It's happening in those overnight hours. So it can very much like vary depending on where you're at. For me, it's eclipse is March 14th, retrograde is March 15th, but for some of you, it might be numerically the day before. There's a lot of vibration there. And again, there will be a shock that hits the system. And a lot of people are not going to initially know how to respond. Others will know exactly how to respond. And it's going to be, again, a survival tactic. So many people will go into a level of survival mode. I expect protest. There are going to be some consequences to the vibration of the next 2 months, March to April, that were completely a part of the plan. For some of you as individuals, everything that you've been working on, you know what you're going to be rethinking, reshaping, redoing, repurposing, like you know. And things are going to go exactly to plan. But as soon as the plan is enacted, whenever Mercury and Venus are following each other through the sky, so much of that's going to be like, I'm checking the results every single day. I'm seeing a response every single day. There's something that we're very, very tunnel focused on. And we have an intention behind what we're watching. But we're also looking at 2 planets that are splitting their retrogrades through areas of detriment. Venus is in detriment in Aries. Mercury is in detriment in Pisces, and their retrogrades are split between the two. Some people will have physical health reactions to this vibration. And what gets discovered is going to require immediate actions and reactions in regards to treatments. And that's what the Mercury, Venus, following the leader vibration is going to be. We're going to do this treatment and immediately look for results. Immediately look at your labs. Every time we do something, we're immediately following up. There is no gap. There is no in between. We get the x-ray. It's an immediate doctor's appointment. We get the medicine. We are immediately pulling the numbers of your labs. There's something that requires an immediate follow-up, an immediate understanding as we go through. very quick response. And when I think of that follow the leader timeframe that happens in the second half of the month, whatever is going on, whether it is in the big picture scale of what's going on in society or what we're doing as individuals, we will be following a vibration, following a situation, watching how something goes each and every single day. And whatever comes out of the outcome of that on the other side, when we get into April, is going to put us into a very different vibration. We've had a shift going on for a while. You guys have heard me talk about it all last year. July and August was one thing. September, October was another thing. November, December was its own thing. We've been in a potato sack race of one obstacle course after another. Potato sack race since January, just trying to pick up on whatever we have and trying to move forward, but we're never moving forward in a straight line. And then we get into this time frame right here, and this is a gauntlet. For my older generation, think of American gladiators, like they go through all the mini courses and then they get to the end and they're facing all the gladiators. Gauntlet. For the younger ones, it's getting to like the mega super race of American Ninja Warrior and trying to prove that you're the biggest, baddest monkey of all of them. And I'm not saying that in a racial sense. I'm just thinking of like all the climbing and everything else. Don't come after me. All the hoops we have to jump through and everything to try to get an accomplishment. But we don't know the outcome of the race energetically. Now, what I will say is there is something solid that will come out of all of this. And I do feel that. Now, that solid energy, it doesn't start to show up until after the second half of April, and even more so in May, June, and July. Where we land at the other side of this energy is something very, very new than where we've been. There is going to be a very big reshaping in our lives on all levels, on political, big, real world spectrums, the financial markets, the industrial markets. There's going to be so much change that when we get to the other side, we're going to be landing in something new. Now, new is going to be shaky at first. And I am playing devil's advocate here, but I do feel it. We land somewhere very, very new on the other side. And it's going to take time to, get a grasp of everything. But for lack of a better way to say it, it sounds like we land in another reality. Now it sounds odd, but it's true. Whatever we start to focus on at the other side of all of this is something new and different from what we were focusing on a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago. We land somewhere very, very new compared to where we've been. So I do feel hope. I do feel like all of the change up that we're going through over the course of these next 2 months is a very necessary change. And some people will come out of the other side feeling magnanimous, feeling like things have gone their way, that everything has fell exactly where it needs to go. And all of the work of the last few years was necessary to get to this point. That's pretty awesome. But for others, these next few months can feel like hell. And we are either going to go through that energy of feeling like everything is darkening around us, and we are either going to succumb to darkness and fall into areas of depression and feeling like things are going to be very, very horrible, or we're going to fight our way through it. And we're going to really hone in on our survival instincts, which is really one of the most Aries things to say. Honestly and truly, it is one of the most Aries things to say. Now, the one extra part before I get into the monthly transits and I start going over all the dates is Neptune and Aries. And that is very much a double-edged sword. And when we get deeper into March, I'm going to do another video that's just specific to talking about Neptune and Aries. But this is what I have felt so far. One, going back to the Meditative Rant video about markers of revolution, I'm going to remind everybody, the day the Civil War started, within that same 24-hour period, Neptune moved into Aries. I can't sugarcoat that. That is real. If you go back and watch that episode, I show you guys the chart. Like, it moves, you see it. It happens. And that vibration took about 4 years to finally overcome. And I'm not going to go back right now and like talk about all the reasons of the transits from then as to why it took 4 years, but I've seen some similarities in how we land on the other side of this. And I have a feeling like whatever revolution-esque type things that we're about to get into, we get over them way faster than what we did back then, just to be real. But again, wherever we land on the other side, it requires new insight, new information, and new ideas. Now, the other thing about Neptune and Aries, and this is something can't talk. Some of the things that I think are way more positive, and I want to give some positive outlooks to this, is I have always felt like we're going to have whole new industries that come from that. New industries and new technologies, especially medical technologies. And if we do think back to the Civil War, the time frame of Neptune and Aries before, more people died in the Civil War from dysentery and bad medical practices than the actual war itself. And most people actually forget that. What came out of the other side of that was doctors had to learn sanitary practices to ensure lifespan. One of the things that I pick up now, whenever it comes to Neptune and Aries, is there's going to be huge growth potential in medical and medical technology. And that's a big positive to me. That there's a huge avenue, there's a huge arena that's starting to take shape. It's going to take the full course of the next 2 years to completely take shape. But in that regard, I feel a positive. So if anything else, regardless of everything else that we've talked about in regards to the energy, I am hopeful for Neptune and Aries, especially whenever it comes to new industries and new technology and the new things that are going to come through, because I feel a lot of promise in that regard. And it's a very pioneering energy whenever it comes to Aries anyways. So I feel like one of the results of so much shakeup within big businesses and how they're about to redo everything is it's going to put people onto a new trajectory of what they do for themselves for a living. And therefore, again, creating new businesses and new technology. And if you go back and you look at historically the things that happened in the 1860s and stuff like that, whenever the last time we were going through this, there's some correspondence there. There's some connections there that also speak to that. Industry changes are necessary. Pioneering technology and industries will be necessary. And there will be a whole influx of people that need to do hands-on things in business to be able to re-solidify what we're going to be doing moving forward. So that's a positive. Take it or leave it. Okay. We're going to get into the transits. We're going to get into the monthly start. Now, this is not like the weeklies, of course. This is actually going to be focused more on just the major transits. And I want to cover each one for different reasons. And I will do some corresponding dates whenever there's some things that connect to one another. So first things first, March 1st, right after midnight. The reason I'm starting this here is, again, this is when Mercury enters shadow. So a lot of the things that we round back to in April can also be a part of the topics right here. But the reason I was putting this emphasis on where Mercury's entering shadow is because this is the same day, March 1st, that Venus is going to go retrograde. Now, she's not going retrograde until way later in the evening time at exactly 6:37 p.m. Central Standard Time. I don't need to move this by hour. I'm just going to move it by day. And you'll see Venus is now retrograde in Aries. Now, with Venus's retrograde again, this feels like the start of a series of responses, reactions, retorts, consequences, whatever it is, intended or unintended, to everything that's gone on since last summer. And I'm specifically saying since last summer because whenever we started to pick up on this obstacle course vibration in mid-July, that was the Mars-Uranus conjunction. And there's going to be some very heavy Mars-Uranus stuff that starts to take through in late April and in to June, just to be clear. And in that time frame, I feel like we're going to have some final closeouts of some stuff to whatever happened in Mars-Uranus. And again, that Mars-Uranus conjunction that happened in July, that was the very last one for those two planets in Taurus. The next time those two have a conjunction, it's going to be in Gemini. So it was a marker that started a unexpected upheaval vibration. And that was again mid-July. So there are elements that speak back to all the way from last summer. Okay, moving along. March 2nd, 10:30 a.m. Central Standard Time. So I'm going to bump this by hour just to kind of get this closer. This is whenever we're going to have our first conjunction between Mercury and Neptune. You can see this right here. The second one is actually going to be at the end of the month. So we have a lot of things that are speaking to things that are happening right here on the 1st, on the 2nd, that are going to be reflected whenever we get to the end of March and whenever we get into April. But again, this is the first in the series of 3. This goes exact roughly around 10:30 a.m. You can see it's exact. And then a few hours later at 12:30, the sun is going to go through its square to Jupiter. There is going to be something that is communicated, some kind of information that is either perceived as a lie, a fraud, or a deception. Mercury conjunct Neptune. For others, it is going to be some kind of information, some level of education, something that we're pushing onto the masses. And what I'm looking at is Jupiter is in Mercury's sign. Gemini already has to do with like the twins, so there's duality there. But Jupiter is the doctor, the guru, the teacher, with the sun placing its emphasis onto Jupiter right there, and the fact that Mercury and Jupiter are in mutual reception. Some of the emphasis of what is being pushed upon people might again instigate a reaction. Now, why do I say that? Because as soon as we get done with this day, Mercury is going to move into Aries, and that's going to be on the 3rd. So there's a lot of push in the energy that is going to instigate levels of reaction. And my favorite way to describe Mercury in Aries, which we're about to go into, that's going to be exact on the 3rd, is like, this is this is fire mouth season. Whatever is going to come out, it's going to burn, it's going to hurt, it's agitated, it's argumentative. There's so much fire mouth. That means tensions and some of the things that we're going to be coming through are going to have a lot of very lit opinions, and a lot of the things that people are going to say will be very argumentative, tense, even if they're not trying to be. It's going to rub a lot of people the wrong way once Mercury makes its entry into Aries. Okay. Now, that's going to go exact around 3:04 a.m. on the 3rd. What also comes forward over the course of these next 2 days, so I'm just going to bump this a day, is this is whenever we're going to have our 3rd Antiscia between Jupiter and Mars. Now, a lot of people, you're not used to hearing about antiscias or contra-antiscias, but basically, if I was to fold the charts at either the equinox line or the solstice line, when certain planets line up to each other and they fold on top of each other, it either turns into hidden oppositions or hidden conjunctions. In this case, it's a hidden opposition. And it's the 3rd in the series of this series of 3. It's the final one. We had one last fall but it wasn't really impactful at that time. Mars hadn't done anything yet. He was fully direct. We hadn't gone through the Mars retrograde yet. It wasn't nearly as intense. But whenever we got into January and we hit the second one, way more intense, and we had a lot more stuff going on. And all throughout the months of January and February, more and more people became very emotionally amped and saying things like deep-seated emotions, like just boiling up to the surface. And some of the things that people believed or emotionally felt in some way that we didn't even realize was still a thing, just kind of found their ways of boiling to the surface. We have learned a lot about how certain people in our lives actually feel. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, it's neither here nor there. But you can't deny how much emphasis more of racist remarks that have been getting made over the course of the last few months that hadn't been getting made in a very long time. I'm not saying it's not been there, but a lot more people are willing to wave that flag and being super fueled by their beliefs, again, going off of that concept, more so than ever in our lifetimes, at least in recent years. So for many of us in our lifetimes. And there's been a whole feeling towards beliefs. Now we know what we didn't know before. We are far more aware of some things. And what's interesting is in an Antiscia, Mars is the one that's stronger, pushing something onto Jupiter. But on the other side of the charts, everything that's going to start happening in Aries is entering contra-Antiscia to the things in Pisces. So as much as Mars is pushing an agenda onto people, Venus's reaction, Mercury's entry into Aries, these reactions within Aries is pushing a belief or pushing a pressure onto Neptune, Saturn, the sun, and everything else that's going to be going on in the sign of Pisces over the course of the next month. And it changes an internal dynamic for how the rest of the month is going to go compared to how the first 2 to 3 days went. So there's an internal dynamic that really starts to come through between the 3rd and the 5th. Now, on the 5th, we have an actual transit. And this is whenever Pluto is going to hit its first of 3 sextiles to Mercury. So you can see this right here. Mercury's at 3 degrees. Here is Pluto at 3 degrees. It was exact around sunrise, 7:15 a.m., around that time. Of all the planets in the chart, Pluto is probably the best placed right now. He's exalted in the sign of Aquarius, where a lot of the other planets are not necessarily well placed. Venus is in her detriment. Uranus is in its fall. Jupiter is in its detriment. Mars is in its fall. Like we've kind of talked about this before. And he's been in a much stronger place compared to any other placement in the sky for quite a while now. And he's in a new area of the sky he's never been before. So there's going to be new triggers, new implementations of power, new implementations of change, new announcements of things that seem very unsettling for people. And we can expect some kind of news that kind of triggers some fear or confirms certain kinds of fear right around this day. But again, this is the first in the series of 3, so there will be other elements that come back around later on. Okay. On March the 7th, going to bump this 2 days, the sun is going to go through a trine with Mars. Now, trines are triangles, water to water. They're always from elements to the same elements. So we're going from Pisces to Cancer. This is water to water. Emotional understanding, emotional consideration, an emotional recognition of desired actions. Mars is action. The problem for Mars is he's been spinning and stewing at this one area of the sky for over a month now. He hasn't actually moved anywhere. But after this date, not immediately after, it's going to be 2-3 days after this, but after this date, he does start to move. So there's something here that speaks to like the understanding of movement, the understanding of a change, the understanding that we desire something. Mars has a lot to do with desire. Getting some type of information coming across, having some level of recognition coming across. That again, some of that recognition, some people might have a reactiveness to the vibration. They're not necessarily going to agree. Is it all happening on one day? No. It's still kind of a slow moving energy until after we get a couple more days in. But there's something here about recognition, pride, understanding, but even from an emotional side of just like praising someone for finally having emotional control or practicing some element of self-control that they wouldn't normally have. But there's praise in this, even despite everything else that's going on. There can be a luck element. Sometimes we have luck elements whenever it comes to trines. But there's definitely an element here that speaks to uncovering or triggering some of the reactions that are about to happen, even in the levels of praise that are coming through. So let's going to keep this going. Now, the sun's trine to Mars goes exact roughly around 11 p.m. So for some people, this is going to be the 7th. For other people, this is going to be the 8th. It really depends on your time zone. Keeping this going, we're going to get to March 11th. So we're going to skip a few days. And what's interesting is when we get to the 11th, this is whenever Venus and Mercury are going to have their conjunction. Now, in the intro, I talked about this conjunction. Venus spinning and stewing. She's going to come into this conjunction with Mercury. Mercury is going to get stunned. It's a very stunned vibration. And then as Venus moves on, Mercury will turn retrograde and then start to follow her. This is the stunned vibration. For some people, there's confirmation. There's news based off of changes that are coming through. Now, Venus has this energy of like whenever she's making certain changes and she's going through energies, she's the most in survival mode compared to any other planet right now, honestly. But whatever is happening to Venus in her survival mode, there's energy coming to follow that's about to like join sides with her. But we have to have these like moments of shock to the system. And over the course of these few days between March 11th and March 15th, there are a lot of shocks to the system. Things that we weren't necessarily anticipating. Things that, again, are going to bring a certain amount of reaction to. Now, if this is having to do with your personal life, this can have to do with discovering that somebody is like trying to renovate part of the house, Venus and Mars assigned, trying to make something pretty. I tore open this opening, but then I discovered something else. I discovered there's a note in the wall. I discovered something I wasn't anticipating. And it can suddenly do a change of plans. For other people, there can be something in what has been reshaped so far in Venus's retrograde that Mercury gives confirmation that we do need to do something that requires constant activity and constant viewing. And there can be something that gets communicated here that has a much bigger element than just basic communication. Because again, we're just a few days away from that Mercury turning retrograde and the eclipse in Mercury sign. Not in that order. The eclipse happens first. Anyways, let's get into that. This is a very stunned vibration. There's something very shocking about this. And again, I'll talk about this more whenever we get into the weekly stuff, and I'll break down things a lot more individually. Whenever we get into the 12th, this is whenever we're going to have an exact conjunction between the Sun and Saturn. We will be feeling this for quite a few days. Building up to this vibration, this is whenever it's the most exact. And we're going to be feeling it even after these days, surpass. Anytime we go through a week of Sun conjunct Saturn, there's a lot of vibration that speaks to taking on new responsibilities, taking on some other kind of role, taking on some other type of situation. And when I think about that idea of that role and responsibility, for some people, whenever Mercury is following Venus, and that's about to start, like I said. That's like having a shadow. And if you're taking some kind of responsibility, the most basic thing can be is you're going to be taking responsibility of your new trainee. For some people, it's going to be taking some level of responsibility or taking some level of viewership over something that's going on with elders. Who's going to be in control of what? Who's going to be responsible for what? And certain levels of recognition coming through. It's still going to have levels of reaction. That has not gone away. It's a part of the whole month. But whenever the sun hits the conjunction to Saturn, there's usually some type of like, this is a great energy for getting awarded something, for all of your acts of bravery, for all of the hard work that you've done, that level of recognition. You're the employee of the month, the employee of the year. Oh, you're getting a whole new position, that type of thing. For some people, though, it's going to be a very negative energy that's going to come through. Because again, we're going to be building up to a full moon in Virgo. At the day this happens, the moon is in Virgo, and we still just had that Mercury-Venus conjunction that speaks to shocks to the system. So some of what gets revealed, Sun conjunct Saturn, revealed by an authority figure, about certain responsibilities, might not lead to a trainee at all. Might lead to people having to file for unemployment and look for new jobs or something along these lines. It's going to be a very rough energy for a lot of people this week. Okay. On the 14th, so bump this 2 days, this is when we're going to have our full moon eclipse in Virgo. Now, this is going to be in the overnight hours, so it's actually more exact at 1:54 a.m. Central Standard Time. And we have a bunch of things that are going to happen during this day. So first, of course, is the eclipse, backing this up to where it's a little bit more exact. 2:30, that's close enough. So here we have the full moon. Again, because this is happening in the overnight hours, for some people, this is going to be late on the 13th. For other people, it's going to be very early in the morning on the 14th, depending just on your individual time zone. Virgo can have a lot to do with the intestines and this level of help, but it's also a lot that has to do with service, acts of service, the way that we are taking care of certain people, taking care of others. It is the written rules, because this is the tangible earth side of Mercury. Certain levels of order, processes that are followed, transportation, your mapping systems, anything that's having to do with the auto industry, anything that's having to do with major levels of transportation. And I'm more regarding like physical, the truckers. I'm more on that level. But this is immediately going to be followed by Mercury turning retrograde. This is another element that speaks to something being very stunned. Now, this is the first eclipse in Virgo. We will have 3 altogether. We're not getting a Pisces eclipse in the springtime. We had it last September 17th. This is going to be the first in the Virgo side. We'll have 2 full moons, and we'll have a new moon later this year. So this is starting forth an energy that is going to impact lots of people in regards to work and services in ways that they're not necessarily anticipating. And again, because it's followed by Mercury turning retrograde, it's going to be putting some things together that wasn't initially connected before. And the connection is going to be very, very temporary in a lot of different ways. Now, there's going to be other things that speaks to unexpected, uncanny shocks. We've got this full moon. It's actually in a trine to Uranus. Over the course of the day, the sun will hit an exact sextile to Uranus. So Uranus has this very uncanny energy of like, expect the unexpected, that type of thing. So I want people to be aware of that. And then the next day, on March 15th, bump this just one day, Mercury, the ruler of said full moon eclipse, is going to turn retrograde. And you notice they're just throughout that 2-degree mark. They're following each other is going to be anywhere between 1 degree and 4 degree. It starts off in this 2 degree area. But a lot of people are going to have their own shocks to their system that's not directly tied to the first of the month. It feels like a lot of people are going to have a shock to their system around the first of the month. And there's going to be just people that observe the situation, but they don't feed into it. They don't connect to it. They're not a part of it. And then this wave hits, and it's going to impact a lot more people in a tangible form. And that connection suddenly gets made. I'm picking up on a lot of different things here. I'm sure a lot of you guys are figuring that out. There's so much to it that I can't just hiccup and put it in one area. And it's so busy and so much is going on that it's hard to pinpoint just one area. But I do expect protests, especially after this full moon, where there's been the starts and the potentials of some so far. It's going to pick up way more after this eclipse happens. Way more. Okay. The eclipse is going to be March 14th. Mercury retrograde starts on March 15th. The Mercury retrograde is going to last from March 15th to April 7th. And a lot of the energy, like I said, Venus and Mercury, their stuff is very connected over the course of this 2-month time span. So all of March and all of April. So moving along. Oh, on the 17th, the sun is going to hit a conjunction to the North Node. It's going to happen a lot later in the afternoon. It's closer to like 1 p.m. when this is going to go exact. And there are going to be a lot of people that are very fueled, again, by a belief system, North Node in Pisces. And for some people, there's going to be like a fulfillment to the ego with the sun conjunct the North Node. For other people, it's going to be very much about something towards their spirituality, something towards their hopes, their idea of abundance, towards prosperity. But there's also something that is very much not being seen clearly. And the reason I say that is because the sun, after it hits its conjunction to the North Node, is over the course of the next 2 days is also going to reach a conjunction to Neptune. Now, this is actually going to go exact in the evening time on March 19th, around 6:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. And the sun conjunct Neptune, it is hard to see anything clearly. It is hard to have a lot of movement. And over the course of these few days, like the moon is going to be in Scorpio, so there's going to be a lot of energy tied to like deep-seated emotions and deep-seated things coming to the surface, fueling part of the belief system, fueling part of what we're doing, fueling part of the imagination for some, fueling some creativity for others, but very much clouding our senses. And a lot of people are still in shock, especially if you had the massive change through that full moon eclipse and Mercury turning retrograde. If that's where your change was, there's a shock to the system. There's things that are just not being seen clearly. But again, there's something about this date that connects us back to the 1st of March. Right after Venus turned retrograde, Mercury made a conjunction to the North Node. It made its first one. Right after Mercury turns retrograde, the sun is making its conjunction to, not North Node, but Neptune. Mercury made a conjunction to Neptune. The sun is now making a conjunction to Neptune. There's a following in the pattern. So some of the information that we would have been shared at the beginning of the month can now be influencing what we're going through right now. And there's more awareness that something wasn't true before. And it's again spurring a certain level of reaction to it. And that's because as soon as the sun gets done with its conjunction to Neptune, that sun is going to move into Aries. And that's going to happen on the 20th, 4:02 a.m. So I'm bumping this to 4:30. And now you can see the sun is in Aries. We're at the start of Aries season. But as soon as the sun goes into Aries, it's moving closer to Venus. It's moving closer to Mercury. And it's starting its these patterns of sextiles to Pluto. Please note how I said that. There's a pattern of sextiles that are hitting Pluto. Pluto, again, he's in a new area of the sky. So we have new fears, new traumas, new triggers, very much potentially being seen with Pluto. And that's going to influence a lot of how this midweek goes once we get past the sun going into Aries. So the first in this week's transits of sextiles is actually going to be Venus's second sextile to Pluto. So that's going to go exact right around 4:30 p.m. The first time she had a sextile to Pluto was back at the beginning of February. It's February 7th. The third and final one is going to be in May 6th. So parts of what it's coming through right here and parts of what we're learning, parts of what we're understanding can speak back to prior energies of what we were dealing with earlier in the year, but now we have a different understanding. And Venus is coming back, pushing her agenda, pushing her reaction, and not allowing a certain amount of fear to take over, where fear was more likely to have a bigger push before. Venus is a little bit more in survival mode, like I said before. Now, on the very next day, on the 22nd, we're going to have a Venus cazimi. Venus is going to come into the heart of the sun. Now, I know a lot of people hear the word cazimi and they get real excited about this word. I think it's hilarious because almost every astrologer will use every planet conjuncting the sun. They'll use the word cazimi for that, but that's not actually accurate. Technically, there's only two planets that go cazimi, and that's Venus and Mercury. We're going to have two cazimis back to back. The reason we call theirs a cazimi and not a conjunction is because these are the only two planets that go in between the Earth and the sun. And in this particular instance, first will be Venus, the second will be Mercury. Is the sun will be further out, Venus is going to come into the heart, and then we're going to have this Earth in alignment. Then Mercury is going to come do the same thing. Each of these planets coming into the heart of the sun are going to have a very specific impact of revealing things, revealing information, revealing an effect, revealing an outcome. And it's not going to be a complete outcome in the sense of like a final type of thing, finality. I blended final and finality just then and really messed it up. But it is definitely bringing something into light. And part of that energy can be, again, that survival instinct between what happened with Venus and Pluto just before, of coming back around and pushing back towards something that previously triggered fear. And once we push through it, it allows something else to come to light. It's like going back to the boss and saying, like, you were wrong by telling me this or writing me up for this or having something going around. And once you push that agenda, it's like, oh, well, maybe that's not what I thought it was. Maybe this was a different thing. Maybe it was going a different way. And having a result instantly come to light from what is being pushed. And that's what part of this feels like when Venus comes into the heart of the sun. So this Venus cazimi is going to be closer to 8:10 p.m. whenever it's exact, but we'll be in the vibration all day long. On the very next day, on the 23rd, Pluto is going to go through a sextile with the sun. So whatever comes to light, we have more reference of what we want to do with it moving forward. And we have a better reference of something of how we want to overcome a fear and a struggle. That's because of the pattern of the sextiles with Pluto. Now, the next thing that's going to happen after this is on the 24th, just going to bump it another day. We have our Mercury cazimi. Now, this is going to be closer to 2:45 p.m. I'm not bumping this by hour. I'm just letting it go. And in that Mercury cazimi, there's a revealing of information. There's a revealing of a decision. There's a revealing of something. And the reason I feel like all of these are connected is by the time we get to this Mercury cazimi, the moon is also making a conjunction to Pluto right here. So there's something that is very much coming to terms, getting revealed, coming into light that can have to do with a power struggle. And my intuition also tells me this can go back to some of the triggered vibration that happened in the week of February 24th, 25th, 26th, 27th, 28th, in that 5-day window that goes back to the days between when Mars had turned direct and Venus hadn't turned retrograde yet. So a lot of this vibration can again speak back to some other things coming back around in the vibration, just to be clear. Okay. Moving along. The very next day, March 25th, Mercury is also going to re-enter its sextile to Pluto. So again, we're still in that series of Plutos. Now, we had a Mercury-Pluto sextile earlier in the month. I already talked about that. That was back on March the 5th. There again can be things from earlier in the month or previous months that we're coming back around to, that there's layers and levels to. This can be letting us know about something that we need to go back and revise and revamp and reshape to try to overcome whatever issues are really being a part of the problem. And this is going to be a very big week of just revealing and having things come to light, having things seen, the power of individuals being seen, their demands being seen, the power of something being seen, and no longer allowing certain people in positions of power, certain areas of struggle, no longer allowing certain things implement a certain level of fear that we were previously almost being engulfed by. Very survival mode, tactic, and energy, very much fighting back towards something, and then allowing something new to start to take shape afterwards. Please note how I said that. Okay. Oh, March 26th, we're going to have our third and final square between Chiron and Mars. You can see this here. Chiron, 22 degrees, 0 minutes. Here's Mars, 22 degrees, 2 minutes. So we're just past the exact. It was actually closer to 6 p.m. that it went exact. Whenever it comes to this vibration, I'm sorry, 2:30 p.m. I looked at the wrong one. I've got so many notes. They're all right next to each other. When it comes to Chiron and Mars's energy, so much of Chiron has been trying to fix something, and we couldn't get certain fixes done while Mars was retrograde. So it's like every time we made an attempt to overcome something, to deal with the wound, with overcoming things that create wounds inside of us, we weren't able to push for a reaction. After Chiron's square to Mars, the other thing that's going to happen is Venus, just a few hours later, is going to go into Pisces. Now, this is going to happen in the overnight hours, and then she does a couple of different things back to back. One, she's going to go into Aries. So I'm getting that closer to doing that. Boom, March 27th, 4:30 a.m. Venus is newly in Aries, and the first thing she starts to do is make a conjunction to Neptune. The last time these two had a conjunction was back in February 1st. The next time these two will have a conjunction will be in May, and it won't even be in this sign. It's going to be in Aries. So we're in a very big transition of energy, but we have to go back towards something. Now, the good thing about once Venus goes back into Pisces is she is going from being Venus retrograde in her detriment, in survival mode, to Venus in her exaltation. Venus does so well in Pisces. She's so empowered in Pisces, and she's so strong. And whenever you put Venus in this area, even though she's retrograde, we have the ability to start to fix something that we previously didn't understand, that we couldn't have fixed anytime sooner. And there's a very big empowerment energy with what we're starting to reshape once Venus goes into Pisces. This is a good thing. It changes the dynamic of how the retrograde has gone so far. And even though, yes, we still have things going on in Aries, and we're now in Aries season, the need for survival mode is not quite the same level of intensity. And there's going to be things that speak to either new levels of inspiration with Venus's conjunction to Neptune, or new impacts. And that one's a little bit harder because that conjunction to Neptune given Venus's condition, can also lead to like the spreading of something. And that can be the spreading of wellness, we hope, or the spreading of something else. And that's a little bit harder. And considering what Venus is doing, Mercury is going to immediately follow her and do himself. There's layers and levels to what we're working with. Oh, it's a lot. It's so much. And there's still so much of it that it cannot be seen clearly. And that's the crazy part. Okay. Oh, Venus re-enters Pisces, immediately starts her conjunction to Neptune. That goes exact roughly around 8 a.m. We're going to bump this 2 more days. We're going to get to the 29th, and we're going to get to a whole other set of energy. And there's 3 things that are going to happen on the 29th. One, we get our new moon eclipse in Aries. So I'm going to bump this a couple hours, and this is actually going to go exact at that 9-degree mark, like I said before. So here is the eclipse. This is an out of sign eclipse. Now, the reason this is an eclipse and the new moon in Pisces that happened at the end of February isn't an eclipse is because it's within 15 degrees of the node. So this marker right here is only about 13 degrees away from the north node. This is why this is considered an eclipse. It doesn't have to be the big spectacle like everyone thinks whenever it comes to that. Just because you can't see the spectacle does not mean that it's not an eclipse, because it is. Now, again, this is the 3rd eclipse in the series of 3. So this is the icing on the cake of really allowing for something to launch forward that is years in the making, because we've had previous eclipses here. The last one was April 8th of 2024. The one before that was April 19th of 2023. Now, the April 19th one was a out of sign eclipse before the nodes changed signs. So it was shaking up an area that we weren't ready to focus on quite yet. Whenever it came to the one that happened in April of last year, we were focused on it. That's where the North Node was when we had that eclipse. Now we're capitalizing on everything that we've done through the Aries timeline and finally taking something more forward into something solid based off of just the eclipse, just that part of the eclipse. But we're not done. This isn't the only thing going on. It's going to be a very dynamic 24 hours. So I'm going to keep this going. We're going to keep this going by hour. We're going to get into the evening time. And at 9:18 p.m., so I'm going to just bump this to 9:30, Mercury is going to re-enter Pisces and immediately start its conjunction to Neptune. So what did I say before? Mercury's following Venus, and everything Venus does, Mercury is going to do right afterwards. There we go. Here's the next one. Mercury hits that conjunction to Neptune. And again, this is the second one. We've already had one earlier in the month. That happened on March the 2nd, right after Venus had turned retrograde. Now we're having another one. And this one right here it's got a finality to it, while also the reframing and the rethinking and the reshaping and all the re's that come with a retrograde. And the reason I'm saying that there is a finality while also implementing the start of something, because we just had an eclipse. That was a new moon eclipse, and that was the start of something. We're finalizing, renewing, rebalancing, while also starting to reshape, because just a few hours later, again, this is in the same 24-hour period, at 6:58 a.m. Central Standard Time, bumping this to 7:30, boom, Neptune goes into Aries. In a 24-hour span between the 29th and the 30th, we're going to have the Aries eclipse, Mercury go back into Aries, back into Pisces, hit a conjunction to Neptune. They're at the very edge of a sign. So there's something about a necessary finality that also leads to the start of something with Neptune going into Aries. Now, this is the first Neptune in Aries. Neptune will be in Aries for the majority of the rest of the year. Later this year, he'll retrograde back into Pisces. And in January of next year, Neptune will completely go into Aries. If you've listened to me for a while, one of the things that I have said is that we're in a 2-year span of transitions between 2025 and 2026. And this is the key time frame, March and April, with understanding transition. major impacts of transition, major impacts of change. And it's quite literally, for a lot of people, going to alter their reality. And a lot of that has to do with Neptune. And if you think about that history lesson, like I said before, the last time Neptune went into Aries was day one of Civil War. There was definitely a before and after moment for a lot of people. Like, oh yeah, I remember where I was before I heard that there was a war. And then I remember everything that started to grab me after the Civil War started. Obviously, we don't have a whole lot of people from that time frame, and I understand that. But what I'm saying is we've all dealt with those situations already. And I would compare it to COVID. We all have a before COVID mind frame and an after COVID mind frame. Before something happened, pivotal moment happens after something happens. This entire month's vibration speaks to a pivotal change. And not all of it is going to be able to be seen clearly. And the way we end the month, we're still in those retrogrades. We're just barely past the second eclipse. It just started. And that second eclipse for this pattern isn't even tied to this pattern. It's tied to something previous. So again, it's like the icing on the cake to get something else launched forward that's years in the making, but there's so much other change it's going on. It's like all of this change has been necessary to make that launch forward. We needed all of the disheveling for this to finally take its forefront and take its step forward. But we don't even fully understand what that step is until we have all of the reactions that come through this month. And again, the month of March is a series of reactions. And we're still a few weeks away from retrogrades ending. Mercury won't end its retrograde until April 7th. Venus will not end her retrograde until April 12th. And it will be coincided with a full moon in Libra. Like they're together, same day. And that will be the end of eclipse season. And what I keep telling people is like April 13th. If you listen to me for a long time, you know I've said like since October is like no new relationships because none of the relationships are in good vibration until after we get to April. April 13th is our day. That's our day. We land somewhere new. April 13th is going to be like waking up in a new reality. And every day that follows, each day will be surreal and new and different. So much of what's going to come through is going to impact us as individuals. I know that. It's going to change businesses and business plans. It's going to launch people forward. It's going to have a lot of activity tied to it. And if there's a busyness factor, there's going to be so much busyness whenever it comes to March. But a lot of that busyness, again, is still a reaction to so many things that have happened up until this point. Now, once we get to the end of the month, again, the second half of the Venus retrograde being in Pisces, that's Venus in her exaltation. There are solutions with Venus being retrograde in Pisces. Whatever she starts to revamp and reshape and repurpose and rework, there is a solution element to that. But Mercury will go from being well placed. It's not the most excellent placement, but it's not a terrible placement, Mercury in Aries, to being retrograde in his detriment in Pisces. So some of the things that we start to reshape and all of the solutions that we start to come to, even they will not be seen clearly. And we can't even understand what that is going to be until we get through the majority of whatever the reactions are in the month of March. March is a response. It is a reaction. It is a consequence. It is a retort. It is all of the things to whatever happened in Mars's retrograde. And for some people, you have done well during Mars retrograde. I have. I'll admit that. Mars's retrograde has not been detrimental for me. The first part of it, I launched my website. The second part of it, I started doing these conferences, and that required a little bit more travel. It was not heavy for me. But for other people, it has been a nightmare. And I know that because you come to me. Sorry, guys. I'm so sorry. But you know who you are. The last 3-4 months have been hell for you. And you've needed someone to make you understand why and how much longer it's going to last. A lot of what it comes through over the next 2 months, it is a response. It is a reaction. It is the consequence, whether intended or unintended, to everything that has been done. And some people will even do well in the Venus retrograde. And people will feel empowered. But I got to be honest, Venus's retrograde in Aries is not always an empowerment energy. There's a reason I compare it to a survival mode. There are more likely to be attacks on women when Venus is retrograde in Aries. On all levels, attacks on loved ones. People will have physical attacks in their body. And part of the whole Venus retrograde will be the response of what we need to do to treat something, to overcome something. And we're going to have to be reacting to something immediately. And we don't even have a clue what that reaction is until some event triggers us to go into reaction mode. And I don't like being in reaction mode. You guys know that. That's one of the reasons I love astrology so much, is it gives us the ability to prepare and respond versus react. But so much of what's about to happen, we're not going to have a true ability to take our time and take a step back to respond. Some will. You're going to have the self-control. Others won't. And there will be very quick reactions that are harmful and hurtful. They have damage to them. Whenever we get to the end of the month, we get to Neptune going into Aries. That's a very fueled belief system. It is. And there are going to be a lot more people that start to want to react based off their beliefs. And that can be terrifying if you really think about it. Others are going to have the ability to expand creative projects and turn everything that they've been working on into something bigger and into something new. Others are going to be so dumbfounded by all of the change they get blindsided by this month that it's going to really take time before they can get their feet back underneath them. The entire rug is going to get pulled. And the thing about Neptune, whenever it is in a fire sign, is it's noted for having waves of massive inflation. We're already struggling, teetering, like, is it going to be inflated? Where's our economy at? I've watched Bloomberg more than any other news source. All the other ones make me mad. Bloomberg, it sticks to the numbers. The numbers don't lie. That's why I watch it. And everybody's questioning is like, well, like, what's Jerome Powell gonna do about this or about that? And one guy said he's sitting on his hands. Another guy, this was this morning when I was listening to Bloomberg, it's like, of course he's sitting on his hands because he doesn't know what policies are going to change next. That's fair. He doesn't know how to respond. He's not going to give time to respond. He's going to be forced to react. So much of us, whenever it comes to the month of March and even going into April, we're going to be forced to react. Some of you are going to do well with that. It's going to empower you and make you turn into a whole different side of yourself. And that can be amazing. But for others, the reactions are going to be to someone's detriment, whether it is themselves or their surroundings. And there will be violence. I can see it. I can feel it. the amount of dark, violent dreams that I have seen. And I'm one of those weird people. I dream things before they happen. I don't dream like what normal people dream like. I dream events before they happen. The energy that we're in right now, I started warning about it a year ago. I started dreaming about it and seeing it over 2 years ago. And I had to wait till we got closer to start warning, hey, but it's going to be necessary. That's me playing the devil's advocate. It is going to be necessary. Where we land on the other side is going to, again, birth new technologies, new industries, new things. It's going to shift where technology needs to focus, where people and what they do in their business needs to focus on. The shift is coming. These next few months are very vital to understanding the shift that we are in, that we are going through. And there's so much of March that it's hard to pinpoint exactly how an energy is going to work, because there's so much of the human effect and the reaction that needs to get played out so we can understand what we're reacting to. If you compare this to some of my prior videos, I do a lot more detail in those monthly transits of what to expect. This one, it's a lot harder because, again, the entire month of March feels like a series of reactions, of survival instincts and tactics to get past something, to overcome something, to be in a better place than where we've been. And then it's a matter of whether we'll be successful or not. Some of the success that can come through, again, it won't be seen clearly. But wherever we land on the other side of these next 2 months, the potential of being solid does follow. It will be there. But it's going to be someplace very, very new than where we've been. And that I know for sure. Okay. I love and appreciate every single one of you. Thank you for the follows. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for all the things that you do. I will talk to everybody very, very soon. Subscribe.